Macro photography, it's fantastic, but it can be expensive if you want to get yourself a macro photography dedicated lens. However, that's not the only option, and I've looked at this before, but I was really interested to see whether either of these options, the macro photography reversing ring, or this one, the macro photography extension tubes, can produce stunning macro images. I've touched on it before, but this time, yeah, I'm going to just go out in the field, use both, and see if any can actually produce something similar to something like this, the Sony 90mm macro. Let's get out there and find out. Right, so today I'm going to start off firstly by using this reversing ring. And all this really is on one side you'll have an attachment that attaches to your camera. So depending on what camera you've got, whether you've got a Fuji, Sony, Nikon, Canon, you'll get the fitting for your camera. So in my case, this is a Sony E mount on this side. And on the other side, you basically have a filter thread. And what you will do, so if I just put the camera down for a minute, is the filter thread has to be the same size for the lens that you're going to be using. Now in this case, I'm using one of my old Pentax lenses. There's a couple of reasons for that I'll go into later, but this has got a 49mm thread on the outside here. So the first thing I'm going to do is screw the lens into that, like so. And today I'm going to be using the APC camera, the Sony a6400. So all we do is line up the dot there with the dot on the side there, and that should fit nicely in, and we're ready to go. So our lens is now reversed, and that's really all there is to it. So yeah, let's give it a go and see how we get on. So what's the other option that I'm going to be looking at today? Well, that comes in the form of macro extension tubes. I've got a set here of two. There's a 16mm and a 10mm. And the interesting thing about these is they've got electronic connections. So these are made by Neewer. And again, on one side you'll have the fitting for your camera. So again, this is a Sony E mount on this side. And then you also have the opposite E mount to fit your lens into on the other side. So this basically goes onto your camera like so. You can choose how many rings you have on, so to increase the magnification. So basically what you're doing with these extension rings is you're moving your lens further away from the sensor. And if you imagine that the light from is coming through the lens and then spreading out onto the sensor, the further away you move that lens, the wider that cone of light showing your image onto the sensor. So in effect, the bigger that your image will be. So that's the theory anyway. And then obviously all we need to do is attach one of your lenses. So, you know, whatever lens that you've got. And in this instance, I'm going to be using the Viltrox 24mm to start with. I've just got the 10mm extension tube on to start, and then I'll use the 16mm, and then I'll use probably both together and just see, you know, have a couple of hours and see what I can get with it. But yeah, that's it. Quite a simple method actually. As I say, once you've got this, that's really it. Let's see how we get on with it. Right, so I think it's time for some conclusions. What do we really think of these two methods? Both really quite budget methods to get macro photography images, and I'm going to start off with the macro reversing ring. I was really hopeful for this one because it is such a budget option, but there are a number of problems with it that after working with it for a couple of hours, it's fallen out of favour with me a bit. So what's wrong? Well, firstly, as I mentioned earlier, if you have different lenses that you want to use and they're all different filter threads, you need more than one of these. One of the other issues I found is I initially came out here today to use the Pentax 28mm and the Pentax 50mm. Now, when I was using the 28mm, it was fine, no problems at all. When I first tried to use the 50mm, it was like looking through a lens that had got Vaseline on the front element. It just wouldn't focus at all. Even though I was moving the focusing ring, nothing was happening. It just stayed exactly the same. And what I realised in the end was, for this 50mm lens that I was trying to use, the front element must be too close to the camera's sensor, which meant obviously the front element doesn't move. So if that's too close and it's out of focus, it's never going to change. It's just too close to the sensor. So what I had to do in the end was put a extension tube, one of the small ones, on to move this lens a little bit further away so that it would focus. So yeah, that was quite frustrating, and yeah, something that I hadn't anticipated happening actually. So I had to work that out this morning here while I was trying to do it. Now, one of the other problems that is obviously you're going to have is that when you're mounting your lens that way, it's exposing all the back of your lens, which generally you don't want. You don't want to get dust and stuff in there. You don't want to scratch it. So, you know, you have to be quite careful. I know you can get some things to protect that, some like little shields that come over. But yeah, you do need to be careful if you're going to use that method, because you don't want to damage the back of the lens there. But I suppose the major issue that I found when using this, with the 28mm anyway especially, is that the distance to your subject is minute. And if you're doing insects and things especially, what you'll find is that a lot of them will just disappear because you're just coming far too close from literally, you know, you're talking there, and a lot of things won't tolerate that. The way I got around that in the end a couple of times to get a few shots was if I found a particular plant where, say, loads of hoverflies and things were landing on it, what I would do is go and stand right next to it, literally on the plant, and let the things fly on, knowing that I was already there, and then only having to move a slight little bit. And I did get a bit of success doing that. But yeah, because your distance to your subject is so tiny, it is quite difficult to use. If you were in a studio doing macro photography and doing sort of still life type things, and you know, close-ups of other things that aren't moving in a controlled environment, then yeah, you know, you're not really going to have a problem. One additional problem I have found with this, because of the close focusing distance, is if you're using a flash like I use a flash, and I put my flash on top of my camera and then aim it down, obviously to get that light to come, it's having to come more or less directly straight down to hit the subject because it's so close to the lens. Whereas if it's here, if you've got a reasonable working distance, you can angle your lens down to it and get that light onto it. So again, that could be another problem that you'll come across. Right, so one of the other problems you'll find, and this is the reason why I'm using these vintage lenses here today, is that these vintage lenses have an aperture ring on the lens, so I can open and close the diaphragm on the lens with this here. There's no electronic connection. If you're using a modern lens, say something like, you know, I've bought today the Sony 1650, which is a pretty standard kit lens that comes with the A6 cameras that Sony do. When you take the lens off to reverse it, what happens is the aperture will go to its tiniest size, so it'll go to f22 or whatever. It just literally closes down the iris, and you can't change it. The only way to get that around that, and it's different for different manufacturers, is that if you go into live view with your lens on the camera as normal, and then put it in the aperture you want, and then I think you have to press the preview button with Sony and then take the lens off. It then leaves the aperture at the, say, f8. So if you want to shoot at f8, you set it like that, and then you can reverse it. There's a slightly different technique for Nikon and Canon, I think, to do exactly the same thing. But again, it's something that's just fiddly. If you're, wanting to use your modern lenses, it's just a bit of a faff. As I say, that's why I chose to use these vintage lenses, because that takes that out there. I can just have whatever aperture I want by picking it on the lens. Right, so what about macro extension tubes? Well, to be honest, I've been really happy with how these are performed. Now, these are probably double the price of the macro reversing ring. These come in at about 29-30 quid, these newer ones, and I'll put a link in the description below, an affiliate link if you want to try and get hold of some of these. But I find these to be much more workable. With this, these have got an electronic connection, so you can use your modern lenses and you can change the aperture. So, you've got no fiddling around with that. I found as well that the distance to the subject is also much more manageable. I'm not right on top of the subject, which I was with the reversing ring. And I'm not sure how the magnifications stack up. I think, with both of these I was getting plenty of magnification, and again, it depends on what lens you're using. And what I really like about this is the fact that it's something I can carry in my bag. If I'm doing something else, say I'm out doing landscape photography and I've got my Viltrox lens or something else, I can just simply put these in between it and the camera, and then I've got an impromptu macro setup really easily. Again, because the working distance to the subject was better with this, I wasn't having trouble getting the flashlight onto it. Right, I hope you've enjoyed this short video on these two methods. If you wanted me to look at any other macro methods, then please let me know in the comments below. If you think I've missed anything out with these two methods, then again, please let me know in the comments below. I'm by no means an expert. These are just problems that cropped up on one day's shooting with that particular method. And I was quite disappointed because I was hoping that I was just going to be able to reverse the lens, and have a reasonable distance to my subject. The lens would work, but as I say, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, it's just a little bit more of a faff, a lot more messing around than it is with just extension tubes that you stick between your lens and your camera. Again, these have got the electronic pins, about double the price of the reversing ring, but for the amount of messing around with that method compared to this is going to be my choice. Feel free to disagree with me. Again, stick them in the comments below. Have you found any ways that work? Have you got a particular lens and reversing ring setup that works really well for things like insects or whatever? Is there a particular focal length that works best? Is it 50mm? Is it 80mm? 85mm? Is it 28mm? Whatever. What do you think works best? Stick all those comments below, because it will help other people who are trying to get a setup for some fairly budget macro photography. And I hope from looking at the images you've seen that you don't have to have a macro lens to get some good images, some good macro images. I've been pleasantly surprised by the quality from both methods, but ease of use, for me, that's the way to go. Anyway, I've taken up too much of your time already. I'll see you next time for another one. Till then, bye.